Welcome to FPB's Meet the Candidates. This Cable 10 series allows you, the viewer, to get a closer look at our local candidates as we talk to them about issues that are important here in our community. We've taken questions from social media, email, civic groups. Everybody has sent in their questions, so we have a lot to talk about. This is all leading up to the general election, which is on November 8th, and that's why we're here, to get a little more informed before we go vote. Today's guest is Joe Bilby, and he is a candidate for Circuit Court Judge here in this area. So I'd like to welcome Joe Bilby. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here with you.
Absolutely. So the first thing I want to do is just give you the opportunity to tell us a little bit about yourself and why you're running for Circuit Court Judge.
Well, the first and most important thing that voters need to know about me, ma'am, is that I believe a judge should always follow the law in every case, not just when he feels like it. And that's the backbone principle of the campaign that I'm running. A little bit about me personally. I'm a Kentucky native. I'm from Louisville originally. My wife and I moved here about 6 years ago. She's from a small town in eastern Kentucky in Floyd County. Her family all lives here in Frankfort now. So 6 years ago, we pulled up stakes and moved here. We've been here really enjoying this community and loving it. It's a wonderful place to raise a family, and we're very happy to be here. Since we arrived, we've gotten involved in the community as well. I'm a member of Good Shepherd Catholic Church. She attends a Baptist church here in Frankfort. So most Sundays I go to Mass in the morning, and then I join her and our two children over at Buck Run Baptist Church as well. We love it here. I'm involved in a couple of veteran service organizations, the American Legion, the VFW, and also the Marine Corps League. I served in the Marines from 2003 to 2007 before I went to law school. So I'd like to thank all of your viewers for paying their taxes. Because the GI Bill paid for me to go to law school at the University of Kentucky. So thank you for that. Mm-hmm. I moved here 6 years ago to take a job with Commissioner Ryan Quarles in our Kentucky Department of Agriculture. He's done a great job, and I've been happy to be a part of his senior team. And it was about a year ago that my wife and I took a hard look at this race and decided that this was the right move for us and our family to take on this incumbent. We recognize it's hard to beat incumbent judges. They seldom lose, but we felt like in this case it was really important because voters need to have a choice between a judge who doesn't always follow the law or a candidate who maintains that a judge must follow the law, and that's exactly what I promised to do.
Okay. So what experience do you have that you feel like qualifies you for this position?
Well, as I mentioned before, I work now at the State Department of Agriculture, mm-hmm. which has a variety of legal needs from internal HR matters to appearing in federal and state court. I've done that well, and I'm aware that the job that I'm running for, a big part of it consists of dealing with issues that arise from state agencies, because most state agencies are based here in Frankfort. So I've had hands-on experience representing state agencies in that court and in other courts. I've done it recently, not in the distant past, not in the last century. I've done it this year, last year, the year before that. So I have a good sense for what's going on within state agencies as they confront budget constraints, personnel declines. The challenges are really great for the hardworking people who serve in state government. And having had recent and relevant experience doing that, I think will prepare me well to be a circuit court judge here in Frankfort.
Okay. Well, let's talk about the position itself, circuit court judge. You mentioned, actions and interactions with state government. But that's not the only thing a circuit court judge does. So can you tell us, just give us a little bit of ideas as far as what the responsibilities are of the position?
Sure, I'd be glad to.
Sure.
Several different categories of cases come before this court. You've got criminal matters where the defendant is facing a felony charge, which is a serious one that could result in more than 1 year of incarceration. You've got civil cases where the amount in controversy between two private parties exceeds a certain threshold of dollar value. Those are the two kinds of cases that most courts around the state predominantly deal with. But here in Kentucky, we have a few others as well. Here in Frankfort Circuit Court in particular, you have appeals from state agencies. So if a state agency has an administrative matter where an employee or a member of the public has some grievance with the agency, they'll try to handle it administratively internally. But if someone, that individual or the agency, is dissatisfied with that outcome, they can take it up to the Franklin Circuit Court for review. So that's a special role that this court plays. Okay. And then there's a fourth one as well where there may be a challenge to the legitimacy of something that our state legislature has done or an executive branch official. Many of those cases, not all of them, but many of those cases occur here in Franklin Circuit Court as well.
Okay. So what do you think is the most important skill for a judge to possess?
Well, there are several. The most important one is the one I touched on at the outset, which is the ability to take the facts of a case, apply them to the law as it actually exists, not as the judge might wish it to exist, and then deliver the outcome that the law requires. There is some discretion in judging, there's no question about that, but in many cases, it's a simple task of applying facts to the law and delivering the result, doing it fairly and impartially. And I think I can do that, and I think I will do that.
Do you consider yourself a politician?
I don't. This is my first ever run for office.
Okay.
My opponent has been running for different offices since 1999. This is my maiden voyage, so to speak.
Okay.
It's been a real learning
So if you get
experience.
elected, then would you consider yourself a politician?
I guess so. I mean, it's just, it comes with, if it's an elected office,
Right.
it's political in nature.
Okay.
You can't avoid it. That's just the nature of the beast. But it's not a partisan office, and that's an important distinction to make.
Well, that was my next question. How do you plan to rule based on the law and not let partisan concerns influence your decisions from the bench?
Well, if a judge does the job the right way, as I understand it, which is that the judge should feel himself to be bound by the law and constrained by the law, it takes a lot of his personal preferences and discretion and kind of forces them to the side.
Yeah.
It shouldn't matter whether I personally like the result that the law requires me to apply to the facts of a case. I should do what it tells me to do. Judges get in trouble when they step outside the confines of what the law requires or find some way around it to rationalize an outcome that that the judge personally would like to see. That's not what I think a judge should do, because I have to follow the law as a private citizen and as an attorney in the courtroom. So do you. So does everyone who's watching this program. And I think the judges should too. When they don't, they're doing something beyond what a judge ought to do under our constitutional order. And I think that's problematic. The fellow I'm running against has done that several times, and we can talk about those today if you wish.
Okay. So we talked about what distinguishes you from your opponent. I mean, and that kind of leads up to my question. First of all, I just want to ask, so in the primary, you didn't have an opponent. I mean, so there was no primary for you.
That's right.
So this race is nonpartisan. So if more than two people had been running for this race, would there have been a primary? Is that how that works?
Yeah, if there 3 or more had gotten into the race, then we would have had a nonpartisan primary in May, and the top 2 vote getters would then go on to the November election.
So again, so then I want to clarify for people that this, just because you all didn't do anything in the primary, it doesn't mean that you're associated with a particular party.
That's right.
Okay. I just want to make that clear. And then I'll let you just tell us, and you have touched on it, what distinguishes you from your opponent?
Well, again, it's my fidelity to the law and my understanding that a judge is bound by the law. And sometimes the law is going to require the judge to do something that he might not feel all that great about. And if you'll let me, I'd like to give you an example.
Sure.
Several years ago, there was a gentleman living in Bullitt County, I believe it was, Shepherdsville. And he's 57 years old at the time. He got in his car and he drove here to Frankfort to meet with a girl that he had met online, a 15-year-old girl. In the car, he had with him 2 boxes of condoms, and they had agreed that they were going to have sexual activities here together. Fortunately for all of us, when he got to the Starbucks on the east side of Frankfort, he found out that the girl he was interacting with was actually an undercover KSP officer, thank goodness. They arrested him on the spot, and he admitted to it. He had met this girl online, and he was here for the purpose of engaging in sexual activities with her. Through his attorney, he was facing both state charges and federal charges. And as part of a plea agreement, he agreed that he would plead guilty to the crime, and he would serve 5 years in a state penitentiary, a 5-year sentence, in order to avoid the federal charges that could also have been brought against him, which might have carried a longer time sentence. So under state law, there's a statute enacted by the General Assembly many years ago that says that if you plead guilty or are convicted of this kind of crime, and the sentence is more than 2 years, you are not eligible for home incarceration, period. You are not eligible for home incarceration. So that was the plea deal that was struck between the prosecution, who represents all of us for the Commonwealth, and the defendant and his attorney, and also approved by Judge Philip Shepard. That was the agreement. Well, after the agreement was formed, before it was sentencing time, Judge Shepard had a change of heart. And so he directed the parties to write a brief and explore whether it might instead be possible for this gentleman to serve his sentence by home incarceration instead of going to the state institution. Well, the prosecution pointed out that there's this statute on the books, and it has been for a long time, that says you cannot allow someone who's convicted of this kind of violent crime to serve in home incarceration. So the judge acknowledged that in a written opinion, But then you know what he did? He unilaterally reduced that sentence from the 5 years that had been agreed to by all parties down to 23 months, just under that 24-month threshold. And as a result of that unilateral action, Judge Philip Shepard told that guy, you can serve your sentence in home incarceration. Now, I think that's a perfect illustration of just how bad judging can be when a judge looks at the law and says, I know better than this. I'm not going to follow the law. I'm going to find a way around it. I'm going to tiptoe around it. I'm going to sentence this guy to 23 months instead of the 5 years we already agreed to, so he can spend his home incarceration sitting on a couch with access to the internet. Now, I think when the voters hear about cases like this, their blood starts to boil. Because if I don't follow the law, there are consequences for that. A judge should feel bound by the law as well. And in that case, Judge Philip Shepard failed all of us. That's one of many illustrations I can give you for why it's time for a change.
Appreciate that. What do you see as the number one challenge to people who are in the criminal justice system, and how would you plan to address that as judge?
There are challenges with the quality of legal representation. Many critics point out that if you can afford to hire a really good attorney, you can sometimes negotiate a better result than if you're indigent and are therefore unable to appoint an attorney. Now, we've got some really good public defenders in this community, and I give them a lot of credit for the work that they do. But I am mindful of the fact that sometimes the people who have an attorney that is, well regarded or highly compensated get a better deal than the other one. For instance, in that case I was telling you about before, the defendant, the fellow from Shepherdsville that drove here to have sex with the 15-year-old girl, he was represented by one of the most prominent criminal defense attorneys in the state, a guy out of Louisville. Maybe he wouldn't have had that sweetheart deal had his attorney been someone who's fresh out of law school who was just trying to scrape by. And my promise to the voters is that I'm going to administer the law equally and fairly to everyone. It won't matter to me as judge what you look like, or where you go to church on Sundays, or if your grandma knew the judge's daddy once upon a time. That's irrelevant. We all deserve an equal shake, and that's exactly what I promised to do.
Okay. Oftentimes, routine discovery orders are not complied with by the Commonwealth and Circuit Court, specifically turning over reports in high-profile cases within the discovery deadline. How do you plan to enforce your own court orders to ensure the Commonwealth is held to the orders you enter?
Well, I'm going to issue orders that are well-reasoned and crystal clear so that they're not susceptible to multiple interpretations or misunderstandings. And I'm going to hold all of the parties, whether they're a state agency or an individual or anyone else, accountable to those orders. The court has an inherent power to ensure that its orders are complied with. And when some party doesn't do that, there will be consequences for that.
Okay.
Most certainly.
Sure. What injustices have you witnessed in or outside the courtroom, and what would be your response to those events?
I've experienced a lot of injustices in my life, and I've observed a lot on the parts of others. And I think that the judge should understand his job to be limited and modest and humble, to listen to all of the facts and all of the testimony, to weigh credibility from the different parties that come into the courtroom, and then to apply the law to the facts of the case without regard to whether someone is known to me or knew my family back in the day. I think that's irrelevant, and that's exactly what I promised to do.
Yeah. In your career, has there been an instance where you face an ethical dilemma, and how did you resolve it?
Sure. I'm the designated ethics officer for the State Department of Agriculture. And, anytime you have a workforce of more than 100 employees, in this case we have about 200 employees, there's all sorts of ethical challenges that come up. Our state has one of the most stringent ethics codes of any in the United States. It arose out of a series of scandals 30 years ago here in Frankfurt. And so as the ethics officer, I routinely have to deal with people who come to me and say, I'm being asked by this citizen to do this function. Can I do it or not? And so we look at the text of the law, we figure out what it is that the person is asking, and we do our very best to deliver the outcome.
Okay. Do you believe, excuse me, the current system for disciplining lawyers and judges is effective? Why or why not?
Well, there are two different systems.
Okay.
There is a system overseen by the Kentucky Bar Association for disciplining attorneys. There have been criticisms that they are too lenient and that sometimes they shield the wrongdoing attorney from having his or her identity disclosed. And I think there are real problems with that because those of us who are not attorneys, we rely on the integrity and honesty of the attorneys around us. So if someone is subject to private discipline and their name is never known to the general public, well, then how can the consumer of those legal services who's looking for an attorney next week, next month, next year, how can they know that the attorney they're hiring has an ethical pedigree that they're comfortable with? So that's a real concern. You know, the disciplinary system for judges, I don't really have a great deal of experience there because I've not been a judge, at least not yet. But I'm aware that there are some allegations that they also have some room for improvement in the transparency department.
Sure.
And if I'm lucky enough to have a say in those matters, I'll push for greater transparency, not less.
Okay, well, that kind of leads into the next question that I have. Do you think judges have an obligation to improve public understanding of the courts? And if so, how should they carry out that obligation?
I do think they have those obligations, in part because we judges and judicial candidates are elected officials. You know, in the federal system, they're appointed, so they're more removed from the life of the communities that they serve. And I think the best way that a locally elected judge can help people understand what judges do is to be known in the community, to be active in the life of the community. You know, I'm involved in 3 different veteran service organizations. I'm involved in the Knights of Columbus. You know, we're the organization that puts on those great fish fries every Lenten season. My kids are involved in youth sports, and I coach a number of teams through the YMCA. So I know a bunch of people in my age group, older than me and younger than me. So if someone has a question about how the legal system works, I try to make it a point to answer those questions as candidly as I can. You know, I'm not giving legal advice to someone who's not my client. That's a big no-no.
Right.
But there are a lot of people who have no idea how our system of justice works, and they find it intimidating. And so for those of us who want to be judges one day, we need to be out and active in the community. It's not enough just to go do your job every day and then come home at night. We need to know people. We need to go to dinners. We need to be involved in the life of the community, not least because that's how you learn about what's going on in the community.
Right. Well, and that addresses a question that I had is, you know, we talk about, you know, public service. An important part of that is community support. So you've shared some things with us. The question is, what civic organizations or nonprofits have you assisted in recent years? So you mentioned.
I've provided legal assistance to at least one of those veterans organizations, maybe more. And then during the pandemic, I neglected to mention earlier, in addition to being the general counsel for our State Department of Agriculture, I also maintain a solo law practice on the side. And one of the groups that I focus on is providing pro bono legal services to religious organizations and churches. It's work that I really love. And I had the opportunity during the pandemic to represent a Christian church down in the Nicholasville area, and then also a Christian school that was having some challenges in their interactions with state government and the COVID shutdown orders at the time. So I've spent a good deal of time over the last decade serving religious organizations, sometimes on a paid basis, more often on an unpaid basis. And I love that area of law. I love working with those organizations, regardless of denomination, because the people who make those organizations live and breathe and grow, they're not animated by ordinary, mundane concerns like, you know, keeping the lights on or turning a profit at the end of the year. They're trying to serve higher kingdom-level objectives. And the people who do that have my utmost respect and admiration. It's very hard work.
As an attorney, you worked on lots of cases, I'm sure, in your career, things that you've worked on. Do you ever wake up in the middle of the night thinking about a case and wishing that you'd done something different? And what do you do in those situations?
I don't wake up with concerns that I'd done something different. I have a recurring nightmare that I woke up and I forgot to study for an exam in school.
Yes.
And I haven't been in school in a very long time.
Same.
But I think that it's just, that's the anxiety you get when you're in an intense career with lots of deadlines. You're always worried about missing a deadline. So you got to calendar this event. You got to, you know, blackboard it over there to make sure you have everything on top. So for me, I'm still worried about missing exams from college, and I haven't been a college student in a very, very long time.
Yeah. Well, I think as a judge, and any of us in a career, we have to make decisions in our job. As a judge, the decisions that you make are weighted because the decisions you make really affect people's lives. So how do you deal with that weight? How would you deal with that? I mean, just the aggressiveness of it.
I haven't had to taste that quite yet.
Yes.
But I have had the experience of holding in my hand the interests of clients who are counting on me to get the best outcome we can. And, attorneys who represent clients don't have magic wands. They can't deliver the desired outcome in every case. They can do the best they can with the facts that they have. So I felt the weight of that responsibility. But what you have to remember as the attorney is, you didn't write the facts of the case. They were given to you. You didn't write the law. It was given to you. All you can do is play the best you can with the cards that you were dealt.
Yeah.
And I think the judge has to do that too. The judge also needs to keep in mind that he is not all-seeing and all-knowing, that the judge needs to have some humility and recognize that there are some things he doesn't understand as well as the others. And if a judge is staying within the confines of that role of just applying the facts of the law, the facts to the law, then it takes out a lot of the anxiety of thinking, well, I need to peer down on this from some towering height and tell everyone what the best outcome is.
Yeah.
That's really not the job.
What is your position on judicial activism?
I think it's a real problem. I think it's a problem when judges step outside that narrow role of applying facts to law and try to do what they think is best. Because, again, sometimes what a judge thinks is best turns out not to be the best because they're not all-seeing and all-knowing. And then also it creates a crisis in the minds of the people who observe that court. They say, wait a second, Judge so-and-so doesn't actually follow the law. He does whatever he thinks is best, and that's a real problem. So if you're an attorney advising a client, it's not a great conversation to have to say to them, well, we should win this case because the facts are on our side, the law is on our side. 99 times out of 100, we should win this case. But I have no idea what's going to happen because this particular judge doesn't feel himself bound by the law. He just does whatever he thinks is best. So for the client, that's a big problem. Look, am I going to pay you, the attorney, for 2 or 3 years to litigate a case when we have no idea what the outcome is? Or am I just going to try to find a settlement to this dispute so that I don't have to roll the dice and accept the whims of a judge who doesn't feel himself to be bound by the law? That's a real problem for our system of justice. And what it does, when you have a judge who doesn't follow the law, like Judge Philip Shepard doesn't, it undermines confidence in our judiciary.
Well, that leads to my question. So what is your vision for the future of our judicial system, and what changes would you advocate and why?
The biggest is fidelity to the law. That's the most important thing that I can promise voters. That's exactly what I'm going to do. I'm going to follow the law faithfully every time, whether I like the result or not. And in time, that will engender stronger confidence in the quality of our court system, because people will have the understanding that I may not have won that case, but at least I got a fair shake.
Okay. Well, I think we've come to the end of our journey here, so I'm going to turn it over to you and let you address our viewers directly and tell them why they need to vote for you on November 8th.
Well, thank you for the opportunity to be here, and thank you everyone who's watching this program. I believe a judge should always follow the law. That's what I promised to do. When I announced that I was running this race, my opponent said that sometimes a judge has to speak truth to power. I don't think that's right. Sometimes a judge should do what the law says. In fact, every time. And that's exactly what I promised to do. And when you, the voters, realize that you have a judge who does not follow the law, you have an option. You have a choice this time. You can choose to elect that judge for another 8 years, or you can choose a different course, a better course. And you can elect a judge who's going to follow the law in every single case. And that's exactly what I promised to do. Come November, I would be very grateful for your support, and thank you to everyone who has given me encouragement along the way. It means a lot to me. Thank you.
And if people want more information about you, where can they find that?
Yes, you can learn more about me at my website, which is www.joebilby.com. You can also follow me on Facebook. I'm easy to find. And if I haven't been there already, I am likely to appear on your doorstep at some point between now and Election Day, because I believe that face-to-face communication, eyeball to eyeball, is more important than being on TV. It's more important than being in someone's mailbox with flyers. Face-to-face communication is the paramount way that I think a local official ought to be asking for your votes, and I intend to keep doing that right up to Election Day. So thank you.
Well, thank you for coming. We sure do appreciate your time stopping by here and talking with us and letting our viewers know how you feel on these issues.
Well, I've really enjoyed it, and thank you for the opportunity.
Absolutely. Thank you. I want to thank our viewers, too, for watching, because it's so important that we get informed, because it's election season, and that's when we get informed so that we can go vote. So that's November 8th. So go vote. When you're done voting, go home and turn it on Channel 10 and watch our live election returns. We'll be coming directly from the county clerk's office, and we'll be giving those live election returns. It is election season, so that means it's time to get informed. Your vote is your voice. I want you to use it. Thank you.